we have our choreographed leg cross.
Yeah. It's gotta be.
You break it up though, so it doesn't look too,
because I'm not doing it the same way. Flexible.
Well, hello. Welcome to Hammerspace Gallery. I'm Hailey Johnson. I'm glad that you guys could be here today to experience Schönfeld, the closing of Nick's exhibition. And I think I'm most excited about this work because it really asks us to resist quick answers and slow down and notice how color changes over time, how our attention changes over time. And I think that is kind of the antithesis of the culture that we live in a pretty big way, asking us to really look slowly. So I'm excited to step into that world today with you guys. We've got Nick here and Terra Warren, the associate curator of the Graham, and she recently wrote an essay on this body of work. And there's a passage in here that really highlights something that I think so many people have felt when faced with really minimal contemporary paintings like this. So I'd love for you to read that for us and get us started.
Okay. I imagine that to those cynical about contemporary and abstract art, let me start over. I imagine that to those cynical about contemporary and abstract art, the type of painting done by Szymanski brings about the most enormous sigh of my child do that. These quick cursory judgments, I find, often don't come from after spending time in front of artworks of color field artists, contemporary or from the mid-century, but rather after a lifetime of feeling alienated by the art world's high and classist walls. We ought to encounter them and feel an opportunity for engagement and to open these sometimes heavy doors to the world of art.
I love that. Thank you. Especially the somewhat heavy doors of the world of art, because I think, if anything, hopefully at the end of this, we've opened the doors a little bit. But I would love for you to talk about why this looks simple and we could go home and roll a color out, and what the process actually is, because it's very different, I think, than what most people probably are imagining when they're looking at one color on a canvas. One color.
Yeah. I mean, there are constancies of using a specific color, but then also pushing the hue toward one place or another. Then deliberate application of said layers vertically, horizontally. I mean, a lot of these.
So you're changing the direction that you're applying the paint each time?
Yeah, sometimes some of the paintings I do, maybe in different bodies, they are just consistently vertical applications. But these are matrices of vertical and horizontal. And then it builds toward saturation, or maybe resolution, you might call it. And then the final layer of paint is applied with a 3/8 inch nap, soft roller, to give it kind of a body and tooth, so that when the glass falls on it, it has something to embed in and rest, or I even use the term cut into. So it's very deliberate building toward. I like the term saturation as, I consider myself more of a colorist than a minimalist.
Yeah.
So that's how they're made.
Are the layers of paint slightly different colors? Or are they the exact same color?
No, they change. I do make some work that is deliberately out of the tube applied paint.
Mm-hmm.
But these are they're kind of meditations on a singular color and pushing it toward, maybe a little higher, higher key version of it, or a broken color, maybe it was added a bit more black. A lot of these are just deliberate mixing of color and observing it and then deciding to apply it and let it rest, and then you come back to it when it's dry. And oil paint takes forever to dry, so I have a lot of time to
just look,
consider.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I came to do video at your studio, you were like, well, most of me in my studio is just me staring. So there's a lot of time just looking.
Yeah, and And that's kind of a value that you arrive at over time through this kind of like slow work. Is you have to understand that like sitting and seeing something is very much part of the work.
Really?
You know, thinking is part of it. It's all procedural, um, and it's all substantive. Um, you know, I had I think that like great things can be born out of brevity, but they can also be born out of a long time.
Yeah. How did that come about for you? Like, I'm trying to imagine Nick in undergraduate school as a painting major. And like, when did you decide that I have the ability and the permission to just apply color to canvas?
I don't know. I mean, like I feel like maybe a lot of young artists feel this way, but you kind of are. I mean, I discovered painting seriously when I was maybe 15 years old, and you're just excited about all the possibilities of trying the thing. And just like the genesis of my love for it was the stuff and mixing the stuff and applying it to this thing, this matrices, and observing it. And they could be even these kind of like alla prima, like one session abstract paintings. And then you go to school and you fall into the kind of milieu of academia, and you have to surrender a bit to that, especially if you're afraid of getting good marks. You know, if that's your prerogative, you're going to do what you're not ordered to do, but you know, the parameters of the assignment. And then I went, you go through a lot of like permutations of yourself, of what you think is yourself, where like, you're trying to like cleverly imitate the people you look up to, like for instance, like, a lot of artists want to be like Cy Twombly or like de Kooning or Guston, um, that was me at least. Or like even like trying to imitate like Agnes Martin. Like I know we were having a conversation about her. We have, but and then you kind of slowly realize you're not in love with what you've been doing all along, and you have to really kind of like get quiet, look into yourself, and figure out what you really want and what you really need. And hopefully that surrender comes earlier than later, because it's a major crisis if you spend a whole swath of time in your life doing something untrue. But for me, I think, my mid-20s, I was out of school and I had a lot of work I had amassed that I thought was very true. And I realized it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't feel much of it. So I was kind of like one of those people persuaded to destroy everything and start over. And I kind of like gradually started pushing toward a much more like literal means of painting rather than like something illusionistic or maybe even like um in vogue abstraction, um and then it was kind of amazing though. I kind of like fell into this world of like-minded artists, and I've had like the good grace of meeting them and befriending some of them and showing with them, ending up in collections, things like that.
Because there is sort of a precedent for this type of or genre, maybe, of work. And I know you talked about that a little bit in the beginning. I'm wondering if you can kind of tell us part of that to give some historical context. I know you're like, in your essay, you're like, I don't want to go down this
Yeah, yeah.
rabbit hole, but I think it is
a
nice.
rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I think
Let's dig up the chain.
yeah, let me like wrap
Pull them out of the ground.
Great.
I mean, I think um when you think about the genesis of this type of painting, your mind kind of automatically goes back to the American mid-century. But than that, I think of, Malevich's Black Square
Yeah.
on the white ground, which is really the first work of this kind. And if you don't know the painting, it was made in 1915, and it's a painting of a black square on a white ground, so outlined by white. And he saw this as this liberatory gesture, saying, I liberate you from representation. This can be about painting. This can be about the color. This can be about exactly what it is. It doesn't have to reference anything in the world. It can be about art itself. And this is, 2 years before Duchamp is putting his urinal out. This is like totally radical.
Yeah, it is radical.
And like, a little bit of what we were just talking about, Malevich was this excellent figurative painter. And there is this element, I think, for painters like you of having to prove that you know how to do figuration before you're allowed to do abstraction, because there is, as I kind of mentioned in my essay, that like my child can do that. So, there is this kind of circular, I don't know, nature to it. Like you have to prove you know how to represent things in the real world to be able to represent things in like this other way. But anyway, so it's over 100 years old, this liberatory gesture that Malevich did. And when he first accomplished this, he saw it as a democratizing gesture. He was like, this is for the people. This is to talk about sight. This is to feel art in your body. This is for everybody. And so it's interesting, back to the top of our conversation, that over the last century,
It feels sort of closed off.
it feels closed off. It feels like it can feel like, I work at the Grand Rapids Art Museum, and one of the first things you see when you walk in is a big Ellsworth Hailey. And that is supposed to be a democratizing gesture, but the art world is scary. And so if you don't get it and you're like, I don't know why am I just looking at a painting of a color? You can feel, because of how the art world functions, you can feel blocked off from it. But I think that you have a very democratic spirit when you think about how you want people to feel about your paintings and experience them.
Yeah, I would say so. I like to treat everybody the same way for the most part. I don't expect them to understand or comprehend. Like, I don't think art is about answers. I think it's more about beautiful questions. And if somebody comes to it with like an open mind, heart, it will do something for them. And it's largely a result of time and care. You could read theoretical texts till the end of days, and you could try to chew on this, like ton of verbiage that is just unrelatable if it's not your arena in life.
Absolutely.
But I don't think, art is for everyone, but I think everyone may approach it and decide for themselves.
Yeah,
Like,
I
of
do
their
think
own
this
volition.
work can like meet you wherever you are, right? Like you can go as deep as you want to.
Mhm.
You could look at this and be like, well, I like that color purple.
Yeah, I mean, I look.
And like, that's beautiful.
Yeah, for me, it's like you. I mean, in my mind, it's taken me my whole life to arrive at this, and I've been digging that hole this whole time. So I can sit here and talk till midnight about it, but I don't expect that of anyone else.
I love that part of your work. Yeah.
I have a friend once who, when I was like an undergraduate, he was like, I don't get art. I don't think I like art. Painting's just not for me, and I don't really get it. But there is this one painter who I encountered, and it's just like these big body-sized canvases, and there's just like rectangles of color. And I was like, Rocco? And he was like, sure, yeah. And I pulled it up on my phone, and he was like, yeah, that guy. And I was like, so you don't like any art, but you like Rocco. Oh, that's like your guy. And and I wonder both of your feelings about, I feel like there's a similar draw to this work in particular, that it could have that intimidating, like, why am I just looking at blocks of color? But I don't know, I feel like ever since I started coming to your studio, I can't help but look for a really long time. And that's not the same with every artist studio. Sometimes it feels like, you're going through a PowerPoint of their work, or sometimes it can be rushed.
Yeah.
But you also really do cultivate, I think, atmosphere in your studio, calmness. But
that's just you as a presence, as a
calm
person. I feel like you kind of just.
But I wonder if you would talk about how your readings into Zen and Zen Buddhism like
Oh,
inform your approach to?
I don't know. I mean, like, you're a young man and you think you got life figured out, and something punches you in the throat. You need to kind of like recalibrate. And for me, a lot of that was reading about these things, like the Zen masters. Um, I just loved the stories of these kind of like serious, but also playful um, contemplatives, and also the fact that like for them, something so banal as like cleaning or gardening or peeling potatoes or an argument could be like uh intro to enlightenment, even suddenly. um and I just kind of fell in love with that sort of like equanimity and simplicity that they've carried out through their message.
Well, I think this work, especially, like I was just thinking about the glass and the specks that are present here and how, I mean, they're a little bit different from your other work, but I think because of that glass texture and all of these like tiny little circles, like they do reference very strongly in my mind the like infinite in the like tiny, right? Like
Yeah.
the infinitely large and infinitely small together in these works is like very present.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a triangulation of things going on in these. I mean, like very much painting, but then also like embracing the ready-made, this industrial material of like milled or like glass spheres that are scattered on the surface, comprising the whole, and and then also like just time and sight. And then the thing about the marriage of these materials with the color paint is it leads to this kind of like wild contingency where the surface is very reactive and responsive to light. Um, in my mind, they're paintings meant to be seen in a kind of like half spherical sense. An artist I've admired um, for some time, who's no longer with us, Daniel Levine, he would say that, like paintings are meant to be seen, not just frontally. You need to move around them. And I think a lot of other artists are of a similar sense, especially if you're a painter and that's your like, your obsession is just that how myopic I can get with just seeing this
Yeah, just
thing.
the experience of
Um,
it.
yeah, it's these paintings are interesting to me. They're really very, very resistant to documentation.
Can I actually, really quick, while we're still talking about this, I'm going to turn the light off and and show you some of what we're talking about. Because now these glow.
Yeah. It's like something's been removed and they've taken on a new life. Or yeah, they know how to grasp onto this new situation and survive.
We were saying before, this was the first time today that I saw them in that context too. And when they were showing me, I spent like the last few nights looking out my window at the full moon, which has been very big and yellow and up above the houses. And I was remarking to my husband about how strange it is that sunlight reflecting off of the moon and how it has this totally different feeling about it.
The quality of light is so much different. Yeah.
And so that feels like that happens when you turn on the light too. The quality of light is so different, even though it's the same light.
Yeah.
And that has to do, I think, with the glass.
Yeah. No, the glass, in my mind, it like amplifies the experience of light, but it also breaks it. And it's this kind of pendulum swinging between solidity, and then you realize what it is and move around it and how unstable it is.
Yeah, it's just like constantly doing and undone.
Yeah, they're very much like transient paintings, or rather, I consider this all one painting. It's all one body meant to exist in kind of like two forms, realistically.
So these paintings too, I'll just mention this is the order.
Yeah, this is the order. And then it exists in a grid form too, which is a summation of all of them in a specific way, which, you know, actually ends up being a landscape format. And which you and I were talking earlier about the landscape aspect of this and how
True.
important it's been.
Yeah. So what is Schönfeld? What is that to you? Where does that come from? And how is this?
It's a family name, my mother's side, like a German habitational name, and then also like an Ashkenazic Jewish name, and it means beautiful field. And I was just kind of like I do, sitting, getting kind of lost in my mind and thinking about this and that, and I kind of had and I was thinking about what I want to do. I mean, I had started this before we met, and carried the idea forward after you offered me an opportunity. But I had this kind of like image or like mythology in my mind of this kind of like traversing kind of like dark forest, and it's kind of like endless, and then you come into a clearing and what that feels like an opening. And I kind of had this image jump into my mind that had been banging around of like these paintings, what they might look like, how they might exist and function. So
Well, and like in this orientation, they kind of create this horizon line.
they do.
Yeah.
So it is definitely like grounded in nature and observance of like landscape, horizons, expanse, distance. I love that these paintings encourage somebody to like see them from a distance, then also get really close, so you can see like the many variables that comprise the whole.
And I'm so glad that they're in a space like this. Like eventually, like would love to see them in like the gram, right? But you wouldn't be able to get that close to them there, right?
Yeah.
So like this is such a unique opportunity to look at this work where you can get as close as I'm sitting right now. And it's encouraged rather than like, well, you're too close now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a special thing about showing in a gallery is, I mean, there's definitely like different boundaries to it. You can have a lot more personal experience. Not that you can't have a personal experience in a museum. It's just different.
I'm curious too for like the people that get to live with your work. I'm sure you've got your own work hanging in your house to some degree. I'm curious, like, what is that experience like? Because I've sort of gotten to live with these in my backyard for the past few weeks, and so my relationship to them is much different now. I'm curious, after you live with these works for years, what do they start to do? Because I do think our perception changes over time, and at that length, when we're looking at experience and perception as like the main theme of the work, what does that look like?
I've had a very broad experience with collectors, whether it's somebody who's a friend who bought something, or they're, like somebody whose vocation, really their calling in life is collecting art. And I mean, like, generally it's kind of like, oh, this makes me feel peaceful, or like these colors speak to me, this scale. People use different vocabulary based upon their background. Specialization falls into a lot of this. But usually it brings people some peace. Maybe like I enjoy the word equanimity in line with what I do and what I seek. And I hope they find that. But a lot of people are just like, oh, it's nice, I love it. And that's enough for me too. Because people say the opposite about my work sometimes. So it's nice when somebody can at least give you that. Yeah. And then, like if somebody's an art collector, they are usually putting the work up and having it coexist with a number of other things too. So they like to talk about the relationships and like the intersections that are created, this gestalt of meaning that introducing maybe mine into it does.
Yeah, like what does that color do to the context of the rest of the work that's being shown around it?
Yeah, if it's a monochrome, definitely they are very bold and pronounced. But then some of the other paintings I do, maybe it's like a 2-color, 3-color painting. Like people even really respond to that changing the way they feel or the way space feels. Um, you know, the
There-
poetics of what they live in.
There was a story I remember you telling me you were painting something maybe for your sister. I can't remember. But they kind of asked, I think they had asked for something earth toned.
Oh, that was my cousin.
Your cousin. And I remember you showing me the painting and you're like, well, it's this like highly vibrant, saturated blue because what's more earth than the sea? I was like, that's like it's like a wrench in their decorating plan, but also maybe profound in its own way and how that can add to a space something that
Yeah.
needed.
It was
To be
given as a question, right? Like, is this earthstone?
Well, to be fair, they did say they enjoyed the color blue, and then I do too. But I was thinking about more like what is considered earth tones. And I arrived at something I've always loved, which is ultramarine blue, which historically is one of the most like valuable, precious colors. People used to cross deserts to find it, kill each other for it. And I thought that this was a nice intersection of my interests and then somebody else's desire to have something special.
Yeah. That's one of the interesting things about blue too, is if you look at any old Byzantine or medieval painting of Mary, she's blue, she's covered in blue, which doesn't have its basis in scripture, but the marketplace of colors, in which lapis lazuli from the Middle East, Afghanistan, present-day Afghanistan was, they were mined there. And so in this way, color informs spirituality even.
It does.
Well, and it's funny, like, there's a very basic question that comes to mind when looking at a lot of colors in a room is, what's your favorite color in the room? And that came up in conversation a couple times at the opening. And almost always people's answers was one of the blues, which I think is interesting. It is one of those colors for people. And I think what's interesting too, and maybe they all do it, but maybe I see it the most with the blues, is the color shift that you've described, I think looks to my eyes the most pronounced in the blues as well.
When the light travels over it. Yeah. The darker paintings, they have like a less of a vibration with the light. It's still there, but it's really like a subtle heartbeat. When you introduce, like the blue pigment itself may have had almost like a little more reflectivity, like reactivity to light. And the introduction of white in these paintings makes them really come alive with the glass. Like some of the more like high key ones on the back wall, even. Like if you get them in the right light, they really live in a different way.
Yeah, this work makes me wish that I had kept more windows in the gallery. Like it wouldn't be possible to see them like this had I kept windows in this space. So I'm glad they're gone. But the light that happens in your studio versus here is so much different. Like the experience is totally different, right? And so in anyone's home, they're going to look completely different as well.
Yeah, and when I had organized the entire suite of paintings in the grid formation, landscape grid, really it was a special experience to like watch it throughout the day under like, the sun moving, the sun coming in through the trees. And then later in the evening, if I was working, it was dark with the artificial lights too. It's really amazing how these things exist on different levels and situations, which is one of the things I love about color, and especially like, call it like this type of painting, is that it really is an observance of like light changing over time. Um, the work I do, like I might be focusing on it like in the winter in the stark cold light, and then it lives on into the summer and takes on a whole different personality. Like I guess you could say like we all do throughout life.
Yeah, I love that. I am curious if there's any questions before we wrap up. I really want to like end this with not just talking about what we're saying, this like long looking, but really inviting you guys to all experience that together in the room today by choosing a space, and like I'll set a timer and we'll all just look for 3 minutes and see what happens and see what you notice. But before that, I'm curious if there's questions for Nick, for Terra, for myself.
You talked about the associations you have with certain colors, and then also a space where you want the color to be sort of devoid of association in terms of like being the traffic towards meditation or Zen Buddhist or something like that. Do you think about them relationally in terms of, like you say, they're hung very specifically, right? And you're in this very particular format.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at this wall, I can't not see the relationship between the leaves, between the blue and pink.
So it was all, yeah, it's very deliberate, the organization. I mean, it was just kind of like rearranging things toward feeling, like toward a kind of like an aha moment, just like an intuitive. But yeah, I mean, the associations of colors definitely like just falls away through time. It's like you could even, like you could use a word or a sound to like quiet your mind. You spend enough time with red and it changes in front of you and you stop thinking of it that way. So I think that's one of the things I've desired from this that hopefully works.
And then the relationship between them, is that something also that you think the associations will fall away when we're looking at this, say, context of thought? Or is it something that is there a tension and constantly our brains making things?
I think it's our nature to make connections. And I don't ever want to tell somebody how they should see what I'm doing. It's up to them. I think work has agency and intelligence, and so do we. And you have to honor that with seeing, whether it's a painting or a sculpture, drawing, video, performance, something like that. You bring yourself into it and reflect, but then also it's important to be there and just see it for what it is, if you can.
I'll say too, I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about this in this setting because we've had private conversations where I know you have specific associations. There's stories that you've told me from your ancestry. And then there's also, a story from the summer about a road trip. And there are so many ways that you relate to this work.
Yeah.
So there is that intentionality behind and biography behind it. And, but I love that you leave it open to other people's feelings and associations about it. But one thing that stuck out to me from when we've been talking about this is this idea of like a memory of a landscape and that flickering, the flickering of the color as you're moving through it, this kind of perspective of a landscape.
Yeah.
And
it's like traversing space and time, whether that's historically or personally.
Yeah.
I'm very much like, I don't know. I mean, like one of my favorite books theoretically was probably Being in Time. And, you start reading about what he coined existing within a time horizon, how we exist historically, presently, and toward future. And I think paintings are like that. They're an extension of our existing in that horizon. So
I love the tension of association that exists in this work, though. And I think it almost reminds me of like when you're just trying to start a meditation, maybe. And like there are all of these like thoughts that are coming in, right? Like, and you're kind of frustrated with yourself because why can't I just
let it
be
go.
quiet? And I felt that with this work. Like I'm entering and I'm making all of these associations between the relationships of the colors and how they're presented here. And that tension of let it go, like exists for me.
Well, I think especially now, we're very inclined toward interpreting and reading and attributing meaning to everything. And I don't think everything has to be that purposive and utilitarian even. And there is a breakage when we face something that isn't really like surrendering toward our will intellectually. We talked about the term present at hand.
Yeah.
I think the technology of language encounters something that it can't wrap itself around, or it can't net and compartmentalize.
Right. Because
And
what
it's-
is blue? Like,
it's
how do
a-
you tell someone what the color blue is?
Yeah. And it kind of becomes like, I call it like a koan, or like, beautiful question
Mhm.
that opens up into something else.
Yeah, that was a good question.
If I, you're like doing, yeah, work, do you find, it's any way, are you responding to any of the colloquial artists? Not really in form, but in its idea, how you're responding to at the end of the time. And, because I hear like really slaps that way. Right.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, those people have always been in my, my mind and heart and interests. And I've had, a lot of personal experience with the work too, um, not just in research, just being in front of it. And, you know, I've even found my work in conversation with some of those people too. You can't, at that point, I couldn't help but be affected by it and be kind of a part of that lineage of thought and praxis too. Um, it all is continuous and a part of, I think, something like what I'm doing, or my the artists I'm kind of like associated with today. Yeah, history is kind of my lifeblood. I would say it's very important to me.
I was going to ask you to, you started your essay out with the piece from David Castle. And when Gabriel visited Mary as a being of light, she understood him instantly. And to me, we were trying to capture something about like the aesthetic experience, like the way a work of art can communicate to us that's not negotiated through language. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what you had in mind, but I loved that whole, I was thinking about that whole process, the way that we can encounter a work of art, and it can be so evocative, but without signifying anything particularly. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't know if you want to speak to that too, but I definitely get such a powerful association, and I love, you really had me, I was like, oh, I will be reading this right
Perfect
now.
entrance.
Yes.
Well, and you'll notice it's an excerpt from a poem about Rothko.
Yeah, and I just read that before it started, and I was like, oh, of course, yes.
I think for me and for many artists and art historians, work like this is attempting to get to something human and something experiential and something about like being in our body, and a common feeling for people who are able to see. Figuration can be so powerful, of course, but it can introduce levels of negotiation with yourself and the subject matter, and that has its own purpose and can really, speak to things that abstraction cannot. But I think abstraction can get in deep, where figuration, it might not be so instantaneous. And to your point, we've been talking a little bit about like, your readings on the Zen masters, and how sometimes something, for them, they're trying to get to a moment of clarity that's instantaneous, whether it's through a playful joke or a riddle or a smack, trying to get to something instantaneous. And so I think that paintings like this can do that. There's less to negotiate. Like, it's almost like, for me, when I encounter Nick's work and work like this, it's almost like the click happens so quickly, and then I have to figure out why. Instead of figuring it out and then getting to it, it's like, oh, like I feel something, and there's something inside me that doesn't quite have words yet. And then you're kind of trying to like put it into words as to what's going on. So the conversation comes after the experience. I don't know.
Yeah, there's like a working backwards that, you put it so perfectly. That is exactly how I feel when I've encountered this too, is like this, okay, like now I've got to go back and like investigate. But there is like an immediacy to it, which again is like where I think it meets people on every level, right? But then that work of like, do I go back and investigate why, is like where that deepening, I think, comes from. Yeah,
I think something can like viscerally strike you and like pull on your, I don't know, your being, and you could spend the rest of your life asking, well, how it did that and why. I mean, I think of like some historians I've met who work with like Clifford Still, for instance. It's like that's their vocation in life, learning about still and expanding upon what comes out of it. I've definitely had the desire to have that realized in my work, because I've experienced it so many times, whether it was something something deceptively simple, or something very complicated. Like it could be a Mike Kelly exhibition, or you could be reading the Divine Comedy. It's all a part, and you can pull at it forever. Like they're those beautiful things you can keep in your mind that make life feel that much more meaningful.
I love that as a ending statement, unless anyone else has questions. So, shall I set a timer? Pick a spot in the installation, and we'll do some long looking for a few minutes, and then you'll be released from this hot box. Right? People, 20 squares. All right, we'll start it at 3 o'clock here. We'll go at 3:03. And go. All right. That's 3 minutes. Thank you guys for enjoying this exhibition with us. I really appreciate everyone that came out today and endured the heat and listened to the conversation. Hopefully, I felt like we've lifted some of that weight from the doors that we talked about at the beginning.
The perfect setting with the grace.
It took me a minute to realize that's their logo. Too.
I know. The first time I came here, I didn't recognize it, and then the second time it hit me.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it's great.